Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 12, The Utopians, from Orders of Universal Reformation by Manly P. Hall. The Utopians, the intellectuals of the Renaissance period in European history, revealed an almost total lack of social consciousness. There was no concept of a growing or unfolding human society. Life for the privileged classes was opportunity without responsibility. The individual lived to advance his own interests or the purposes of his own social level, oblivious of the pressing requirements of the human family as a group. The medieval thinker contemplated the inevitable charges brought by the passing of time without sensing the presence of any purpose or pattern beneath the surface of shifting circumstances. He knew that he lived in a world different from that of the Greeks or the Romans, but the differences appeared incidental or providential. He never thought in terms of having outgrown old orders or old ways. So many artificial hazards, most of which originated in crystallized mental habits, obscure natural trends that there seemed no reason to assume any personal responsibility for progress. The proper end of life was to cultivate luxury and to devise various means of diverting one's attention from the inevitable tragedies which have always burdened existence. Physical life was without purpose or incentive, and there seemed to be no valid reason to waste much effort or time building a better world for future ages one would not live to see. The church taught that all human activity was controlled by the divine pleasure. Things happen simply because deity willed them to happen, and men must endure that which the gods decree. The death rate in the city of Florence was high, a proof that the Eternal Father desired to chastise the Florentines. It never occurred to these good people that their perfectly reasonable habit of throwing all the refuse into the middle of their streets and leaving it there might have something to do with their vital statistics. Unburdened by any morbid reflections about the relationship between cause and effect, there was slight incentive towards the correction of existing faults, errors, and delinquencies. In fact, it would be sheer audacity to attempt to improve upon conditions which God had decreed as the means of accomplishing his own fearful and wonderful ends. Man is never so sure of himself as when he huddles with others of his kind, and all are dominated by common convictions. These convictions assume the proportions of universal truths. The era of exploration which followed the voyages of Columbus brought about a rapid change in the popular mind. A spirit of adventure was born, and man began to break through the self-imposed delusion which had limited his perception for centuries. The Protestant Reformation enlarged the religious horizon, freeing the human intellect to explore the mysteries of the physical world without benefit of clergy. A courage to do and to dare began to manifest itself in many parts of Europe and in several levels of the social structure. This drift towards humanism gained rapidly in momentum, and in 300 years, the vast structure of scholasticism was almost broke down. Man emerged as an active agent in shaping the destiny of his way of life. He began to perceive that he could play an important part in molding his own destiny. He glimpsed an evolving plan, with himself as a determining factor in the rate of his own progress. His convictions were summarized in the proverb, "God helps them who help themselves." A social conviction is championed first by a few progressive spirits, and prominent among the pioneers of humanism were the Utopians. Today, the early efforts of these social visionaries are regarded as extravagant and fantastic, but in their own times, these men, through their writings, exerted a wide sphere of influence. Most of the utopias were advanced originally as fictional works, but they were philosophic fiction. Each in some way depicted a new and better concept of life, brought about by a conscious desire to practice the essential precepts of Christian morality and ethics and simple human decency. The utopian visionaries were really men of vision. Most of the utopias were inspired by Plato's empire of the philosophic elect. This was a commonwealth of the wise which flourished because its citizens conducted themselves in a civilized and enlightened manner. It has been pointed out that Plato was one of the most intellectually mature men of the ancient world. He traveled extensively and enjoyed the intimate association of Socrates, the outstanding socialist of his time. Plato made a thorough study of the political conditions of the Greek states and foreign nations, and had some brief but intense personal experience in government. He recognized the inevitable collapse of corrupt institutions and advocated the fundamentals of social ethics, namely individual integrity and collective responsibility. Although Plato's ideal state has never come into actual existence, his concept has influenced practically all idealistic and humanistic reforms since his time. The Island of Utopia, according to the description by Thomas More. The Utopians suffered from the common fault of reformers. They were over-optimistic. They were moved by the conviction that human beings wanted to live well, but were prevented from so doing only by the external pressures of despotism and corruption. It is still a mooted question as to whether a better world will result in better men, or whether better men are necessary to make a better world. Most of the utopians assumed the former, and they accomplished much, even if the end they sought remained elusive. The utopias, as conceived by their original authors, usually existed in remote places outside the boundaries of the traditional domination of the church and state. In various ways, the heroes of these social romances strayed from the folds of prevailing doctrines into some distant place, where a philosophic empire was flourishing under the wise leadership of saintly men administering enlightened laws. The utopian states were of no great size, but were oases of integrity in deserts of corruption. It was the duty of the hero in each case to investigate the secrets of the success of these various communities and to bring back the record for the edification of his fellow men. The early utopias, with the possible exception of Bacon's New Atlantis, were dated in an amusing way. That is, they were heavily burdened with the prevailing prejudices of their time. The authors of these works were not really free souls according to modern standards, but they were groping towards intellectual honesty. For example, Andres Christianopoulos was stoutly Lutheran, and Campanella's City of the Sun was reminiscent of a well-regulated monastery. Both of these utopias had the virtue of sincerity, although each advocated a cause close to the heart and experience of the author. The trend in utopias was distinctly towards the cooperative commonwealth. Men worked together, shared their goods in common, and practiced equality. Even this could be carried to an extreme, and we can but wonder what frustration inspired the idea that common ownership could be extended to include wives, if a trifle orthodox in some respects, and a little heterodox in others. Most of the emphasis were especially sound. Education was stressed at a time when it was generally neglected, and all children were instructed in religion, morality, ethics, and social consciousness, as well as in the trades, crafts, arts, and sciences. Each family was self-supported. Work was honorable, and the drone was an outcast. Living was simple and orderly. Cleanliness and sanitation were stressed, and each citizen was responsible for his share in the common security. Disputes were settled by arbitration. War was rejected as a means of attaining justice, and the military, if it existed as a class, was entirely defensive. Scholarship and piety were greatly admired. Medicine was socialized. The citizen, by fulfilling his part in the community life, was entitled to all the advantages which the community could offer. Such regimentation scarcely would satisfy the modern individualist. Life in most of the utopias would be secure, virtuous, orderly, and devastatingly dull. In this way, the fictions bore witness to the temperaments of their writers. These men were mostly pious characters aware of a pressing need, but not by nature especially liberal themselves. At best, their liberty was relative, but in their own times they were regarded undoubtedly as radical innovationists. It was not until after the cycle of the first great utopias was complete that the next group of socialized fiction made its appearance. The second cycle extended through the 18th century, included psychological factors well worth noting. The humanists, having freed themselves from the despotism of the schoolmen and the clerks, found the older utopias unsatisfactory as concepts of solutions. Freedom was the new keynote, and there seemed little advantage to be gained by freeing oneself from the malevolent despotism of European civilization, only to fall into the benevolent despotism of a utopia, in which every virtue was regimented and every action controlled by some kind of inflexible social conviction. The intellectual did not want to exchange one old world for another. He wanted to build a new world nearer to his heart's desire. Individualism was becoming a force to reckon with. Each man should be king of all he surveyed. Everyone should have his own utopia fitted to his own requirements. He desired not a finished product with which to conform, but rather the raw material which he could fashion according to his own notions. The place of the utopias in the adept tradition is our primary concern. There can be no doubt that the writers of these works were influenced, at least indirectly, by the great philosophical institutions of antiquity. Probably Sir Thomas More, 1478 through 1535, is the most difficult to explain and understand of these social idealists. He was not a man given especially to humanitarian impulses. He succeeded Cardinal Wolsey as Lord Chancellor of England. Though just in his office, he was relentless in his persecution of heretics. He gained the bitter resentment of Henry VIII for refusing to attend the coronation of Anne Boleyn. He was committed to the Tower because he refused to take the oath of supremacy. He was executed the following year and his head exhibited publicly on London Bridge. Portrait of Thomas More, wood engraving, after Holbein. Various explanations have been given to explain the motives which led to the writings of his utopia. One group holds the work to be a satire. Another regards the production as inspired by an earnest desire to correct prevailing delinquencies. It is generally agreed that the book stems directly from the Platonic concept of social order. It is possible that the utopia of More was the product of the secret societies, which were busily at work under the surface of European politics. If so, the entire subject invites a deeper and more thorough consideration. There can be no doubt that Andres Christianopoulos was a definite product of the esoteric schools, with which the author's name has been associated for more than 300 years. The same remarks apply to Bacon's New Atlantis. At the same time, the more obvious factors should not be ignored. The discovery of America and the highly colored reports of Spain and Portuguese navigators changed the whole complexion of European thinking, inspiring intellectuals to a variety of conjectures about the cultural achievements of strange and distant peoples. There were many vestiges of an advanced civilization on the Western Hemisphere. Imagination enlarged the reports that drifted back with the returning adventurers. It seemed highly probable that in isolated areas, far distant from Europe, communities could exist, practicing utopian policies, and living under enlightenment, even inspired, systems of government, society, and education. The empires of the Aztecs and Mayans may have exercised a considerable influence upon the receptive minds of progressive thinkers in England and on the continent of Europe. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.